It's just struck me, are we recording the session? Or should we record the session?
Yeah, we should be recording the sessions for all the symposium. But yeah, you're the host. Maybe you can do it.
Okay. We are recording. Let's start. Okay. Hello, everyone. How many? We've got 19 participants. Okay, welcome to my presentation, Putting the Horse Before the Cart, Who and What Drives Pre-Sessional Course Delivery. So this is a question that's been on my mind a lot recently because I'm going to be leading the pre-sessional course here this summer. So, okay, firstly, what about you? Will you be teaching on this summer's PSE course? Perhaps you can just show me in the chat, A, B, or C. Is that everybody? Okay, so I hope Nigel and Parag realize that if you put answers like that, that means I'm coming to you next. Nigel, what is a D? Nigel, are you there?
Nigel is muted.
He's answered in the chat.
Yeah, Nigel is muted.
None of the above.
I'm here now. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I won't be doing it this summer, and I don't think I'll be doing it in the future. So I couldn't give an answer there. But I do know what a PSE is. Okay. None of the above.
That's.
I mean, I've done it before.
That's a pity. It's a pity not to have you on. It's PSE's loss, Nigel.
Indeed. Thank you.
Parag. Interesting response.
Yeah, why wasn't it DC?
That's Parag.
Yeah, because I am involved, but I want to know a bit more about it and the structure of it this summer and how it works out. Okay,
well, I think you've come to the right place, Parag. Let's find out. Okay, and it looks like most people, we've got lots of A's, so hopefully there's a clear reason why you've come to this session, and hopefully Joy's previous session, and this is going to be of some practical use for everyone. So the parts that I'm going to include, firstly, I want to introduce the theoretical framework that I'll use and how that applies directly to the PSE at XJTLU. Thirdly, what's been referred to as the cosmology of the PSE at XJTLU, not coined by me. And then finally, some suggestions maybe to promote active engagement with the course delivery. Okay, so who and what drives the pre-sessional course delivery? If we think about the Carter's course delivery, what happens in this space between the course as a theory of an idea of a course that Parag is not quite sure about yet, understandably, and Parag going into the classroom and, well, a BBB classroom, and dealing with the course delivery. What happens? Who is on the horse, or who is driving the horse here? Any ideas? What do you think? Parag, you said you need some more ideas first.
Yeah. So I guess we have institutional demands. There's, you know, the stuff that we have to get done. So that has an impact on what we teach.
That's a good point. Yeah, so we're going to talk about the context. I think that's one aspect of the context, the institutional context, and the demands that are a force that determines the institutional needs. Okay, something in the chat. Qingyang, money. Yeah, sure. Whose money, Qingyang?
Well, it's like students paying, so it's like we need to get what they give them what they paid for.
And what do you think they paid for?
I'm not sure. I don't think every student paid to get high quality education. Some of them maybe just getting here, just wanting a degree, wanting this experience so then they can get into the degree courses.
So they want the certificate, they want to pass.
Yeah.
Okay. So does that determine our course delivery? Maybe.
So I think that's why you get many responses like there's too many homework, or they think I want to do less work, but I still want to get the certificate out of it. So we still need to consider their opinions, but we can't let them dominate our course design.
Okay, yeah, I agree. I think that's a very good point. We certainly need to consider these opinions. We certainly need to consider the perceived needs of the students from their perspectives, but perhaps that can't be the only factor that determines course design and course delivery. So what are these factors? What happens in this space between the course as a theoretical concept and the reality of course delivery? Peiling, specification, syllabus. Sure. Do you want to say any more about that, Peiling, or is that clear? Okay, these are all great points, Peiling. Do you want to summarize some of these points? Okay, maybe they're points that we will come back to in the future. Okay, so questions to think about, to ponder throughout the talk and afterwards. What are the factors that lead from course as a theory to the reality of course delivery or curriculum enactment? And who is this? Who is driving the horse? Driving the horse? Riding the horse? Driving the course delivery. Okay, so maybe this is all a bit airy-fairy at the moment, and we need Peiling says joy is driving the course delivery. I don't know if that is joy as in the person, or if that is the student's joy or the teacher's joy to be on the PSE. So many aspects of joy that we have. Aspects of joy. Good name for an album. Okay. Yes, Pat. So I was thinking about what kind of theoretical framework we can use to underpin some of these ideas, and I wasn't sure what to use for this until I attended our own SEPA Ballet conference the other weekend. And in the final plenary, we heard from Steve Kirk, who was articulating much more coherently than I am, some of these ideas about what drives course delivery in his fields of practice model. And I thought two reasons I can use this. Firstly, I think it illustrates the point that I'm trying to make. And also, Steve Kirk is a former colleague of mine. And I think that the interactions that I've had actually working together with Steve Kirk is in itself an illustration of what I'm trying to say here. So Steve's model presents three different fields of practice: EAP research, EAP curriculum, and EAP pedagogy. And it illustrates how course design and delivery is directed by what he calls the flow of knowledge across these permeable boundaries of these three fields. Okay, so let's use an example. Actually, I'm just going to rip off the example that Steve used during his talk. EAP research. He used the example of John Swales. John Swales is kind of at the root of most of EAP genre analysis over the last 30 years or so, establishing examples of how subject-specific language and discourse is specific to the genres in which it is used, and there are similarities between genres within particular academic subjects, and there are differences between different academic subjects. So findings in such research has led to development of EAP materials. For example, quite a popular course book that Swales and Feek have developed from such research, and leading to the design of curricula. For example, Durham University's presessional, which is where I work together with Steve Kirk. And this has led to EAP pedagogy. It's influenced EAP pedagogy. How do I know it's influenced my EAP pedagogy? This is actually my class. These are students from my class. And here we have students from two different disciplines. This was Yue, who was studying, or now she will have studied, a master's in international economics, banking and finance, talking to another student, Hao, who will have studied a master's in international relations. And they are showing each other some posters, some visual representations of what they saw as the typical moves within most common genres of writing in their subject. And then, yeah, they mingled around and explained their visual representations to one another. Okay, so this feels like quite an obvious example of hopefully the horse being put before the cart. Quite well-known research has influenced curriculum design. Curriculum design has influenced EAP pedagogy. Okay, but still the question remains of who is riding this horse? Who is this? Is it John Swales? Is it Steve Kirk, who was the main person who designed this curriculum? Is it me for planning the lesson? Is it Yue and Hao? After all, they were able to decide themselves how to represent their genres visually. It was their decision. So who is this? Who is driving this horse? And as I said, these boundaries are not really boundaries at all. They are very permeable. So these flows of knowledge can work in different ways, in different directions. So as an example, the theory that Steve Kirk here has developed actually came from research that he did whilst teaching on a presessional himself at Durham University. This is a picture of him doing similar genre analysis activities with his presessional students. And from that, he develops a framework. He publishes his theory. He gets invited to speak at major international conferences such as ours about it. And that influences, as we've seen, influences curriculum design. It also influences pedagogy. For example, Steve played a big role in presenting at staff development sessions during my time on the Durham presessional. He was heavily involved in the induction process, which influenced my pedagogy. and the experiences that I had in the classroom in Durham influenced me when I came to design our curriculum for PSE here. And then when that curriculum was enacted last summer, that influenced again my EAP pedagogy. But you can see Steve's pedagogy in the classroom in 2018, mine in 2019, and then what my course delivery looked like in 2020, over 3 years, is quite different. They look quite different. So what is the reason for that? Well, it must be something to do with different context. Maybe it is the context that drives the PSE course delivery. So we'll look at that in a moment. And I think this flow of knowledge, this kind of seamless flow of knowledge, is quite typical of the nature of PSEs. In fact, from 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, I taught in 4 different PSEs in 4 different universities. And that's quite typical in the UK, at least, for teachers to tour the pre-sessional circuit, use their summers to explore different PSEs in different places. And I think it becomes a very potentially fertile environment for this kind of spreading of knowledge. I've used one example here of spreading of knowledge from Durham University to XJTLU. I would be able to give similar other examples from the other universities that I've worked in. So perhaps that's what it is. Perhaps it's this accumulation of knowledge flows from theory, from curriculum design, from the experiences that we have in our own classroom, in other people's classroom, that leads to course delivery. But as I've said, this course delivery looks very different, and that's what Steve Kirk refers to as recontextualization. So how does this recontextualization work? Well, that's actually the part of the framework that I haven't referred to yet. Is this outer ring, because these 3 fields of practice all operate within a context. So the context that I've mostly operated in different pre-sessionals is a very traditional UK-based pre-sessional. I've taught pre-sessionals in 3 different UK universities, Cardiff, Newcastle and Durham. On the surface, they're all quite homogenous. They're all Russell Group universities. They're all based in the UK. They all have pre-sessional courses, of course. All of their pre-sessional courses are BALIP accredited. So all of these elements shape the context of my knowledge and my interactions with these flows of knowledge between the fields. And in turn, that would shape my course delivery. So if we just take Durham University as an example, EAP research shaped the context of course induction. There's a week-long course induction at Durham University. There were weekly community of practice sessions, which very much focused on enactment of the curriculum, looking at the following week's syllabus and how that could best be delivered. There's teacher development that was very much aligned with BALIP competencies, leading to BALIP fellowship. And action research was clearly supported. It was clearly supported for Steve Kirk in order to collect his data for his doctorate research. About the curriculum, well, what Biggs and Tan call constructive alignment was very, very important within the context of Durham University's curriculum. Constructive alignment referring to there being clear links between the learning outcomes, the broad learning outcomes in the curriculum, the assessment of what students are expected to demonstrate in the assessment, and what students are taught. What are the learning aims lesson by lesson? And for constructive alignment to even be possible, there needs to be transparency of task requirements in the assessment, transparency of marking descriptors, so that students are able to notice this alignment and understand it. In the curriculum, there was integration of all the skills. For example, texts were read in order to prepare students for lectures. They would watch lectures based on texts that they read. They would then, that would feed into seminars. They would come to seminars prepared to discuss the content of the lectures and the content of their texts. And those discussions would guide the students' writing process. So there was really an integration of all skills. And process writing dominated the curriculum. By this, I mean that other skills were hung upon, were pegged to a writing project that ran throughout the whole course. So this in turn influenced pedagogy. What was the context of the pedagogy? It was taught on site. There was about 600 students, which might be similar to our pre-sessional here. The vast majority were Chinese, which is increasingly, or has increasingly become a feature of the context of UK pre-sessionals over the last decade or so. There were about 50 to 60 EAP teachers, and another feature of the context of UK pre-sessionals, most were on sessional or fixed term contracts for the duration of the course. And all the teachers were qualified with either Delta or a relevant master's qualification. Okay, so what about XJTLU? Well, I've mentioned the ways in XJTLU. Maybe it's obvious the way that XJTLU is different from the context of Durham University. Durham University is a 200 years old, very traditional Russell Group university in the UK. XJTLU is by comparison, a fledgling university in China, transnational education, private institution with English as a medium of instruction. So how similar can these fields of practice be? Well, quite similar in some ways. This summer, we're going to have an induction. Unfortunately, it won't be a week-long induction, but we'll have an induction nonetheless. We will have weekly community of practice sessions. Action research will certainly be supported. We have several teachers who are going to be conducting studies during the course. I would welcome anyone else who is thinking of conducting action research to come and talk about it. And I would certainly support teachers to align this research with the completion of the PG cert, particularly module 402. But I think it's in curriculum design where I think there's real alignment between what was done in Durham and what will be done this summer at XJTLU in terms of constructive alignment, students noticing that alignment between learning outcomes, syllabus aims, assessment, integration of all skills, feeding into a process writing throughout the 8 weeks of the course. But there are clear differences in terms of pedagogy. Okay, I think the makeup of teachers is similar in terms of qualifications, but many differences. So, okay, sticking with pedagogy, it will not be taught on site. As you know, the PSE 2021 XJTLU will be taught online. And I think our students will be 100% Chinese. So similar, but even more Chinese. We have more teachers. We have, up to now, we have 68 teachers on the course. And one big difference in terms of the context is that our teachers are employed by XJTLU on full-time or permanent contracts. Maybe that makes a difference to the pedagogy. In terms of the research, EAP research, well, as I said, we don't have a week-long induction. We only have the luxury of 2 days, but we'll make the best of it. And rather than teacher development being aligned with the BALIP competences, teacher development will be more aligned with the UK PSF competences, because this is what is prioritised in the PG cert leading towards HEA fellowship. So in aspects such as the peer observation framework that will be used, this will relate to UK PSF, which hopefully will be helpful for teachers here if they're working towards their PG Cert 401. So some differences in terms of context. Okay. So these similarities and these differences is what Kirk is referring to when he talks about recontextualization. And for Steve Kirk, the way that we structure these accumulated flows of knowledge in a particular context that have been contextualized and recontextualized to a specific learning and teaching environment, the way these have been structured communicates a message. So what about teachers? How do teachers notice the messages that are being communicated, that are embedded in these recontextualized knowledge patterns? Or maybe a better question, how can teachers contribute towards the shaping of these messages and these patterns? Well, in order to talk about this, Steve Kirk uses another metaphor, the metaphor of cosmology and constellations. When we're talking about the communications of messages, or when Steve is talking about this, he's very much influenced, building on the work of Carl Mayton. The medium, the structuring of knowledge practices is itself a message. And Steve relates this to cosmology. He says, taking a step back, viewed as a whole, course messages can be conceptualized as working together to construct a value system informing the design, delivery, and experience. Pre-sessional program. He's talking here about the Durham pre-sessional program, but I think the same can be applied. This value system is threaded throughout a program, and we'll return to this quote and see how it relates to what we do at XJTLU. And I think that the metaphor he uses is particularly apt. Different times, in different places, ancient astronomers have long looked up at the stars and they've read different messages in the patterns that they notice over many different millennia. Here we can see some ancient Chinese astronomers, I think maybe some 2,000 years ago. They've got different astronomical apparatus to look up at the stars and to notice different patterns. And they develop cosmological charts from this. This is one star chart developed from this period. But the point is that astronomers were looking at the stars, of course, the same stars in different places at the same time. There were astronomers in ancient Greece, in ancient Rome, in the Middle East, looking up at the same stars, but they were finding very different patterns. They were constructing very different meanings. Why? Because the accumulation of knowledge and their assumptions and the myths they built around these, and maybe the tools themselves were quite different. So depending on the context, they noticed quite different patterns, quite different constellations in these stars. And nowadays we can even more powerfully inspect these different patterns. We've got powerful telescopes. We can zoom in on the cosmos, we can zoom out, and this zooming in and out can help us to better notice and contextualize these patterns. Okay, so let's use an example of the PSE cosmos and see what patterns we can find and what messages they might communicate. Okay, let's start by zooming way out at the most broadest lens of the telescope and look at the learning outcomes within the course handbook. Okay, so what can the learning outcomes communicate to us? Well, there are two learning outcomes that seem to refer quite specifically to reading and writing, and there are two learning outcomes that seem to refer more specifically to speaking and listening. Two of these learning outcomes refer to supporting a stance. So clearly developing our own opinions and justifying these is a key message that these learning outcomes are communicating. And there are another two learning outcomes that perhaps relate more to ways of thinking. Reflective learning, critical thinking, avoiding plagiarism. Okay, we always have avoiding plagiarism, yeah, as a learning outcome. Maybe for some people this is more of a learning a mechanical procedure. But for me, I think it is an academic way of thinking. Okay, so there's some messages communicated here, perhaps. Okay, so maybe I'm interested in learning outcome A, and it talks about the evaluation of appropriate sources. I want to find out a bit more about that. So then I can use my telescope and I can zoom in. I'm going to zoom in on week 2, because one thing I notice when I zoom in on a week of the syllabus is that each week has a theme. And week 2 is about exploiting academic sources. So maybe I can find some connections there. I can make some patterns with evaluating sources in week 2. What can I notice when I look at a specific week of the syllabus? Well, I can notice that equal time is given to reading writing lessons, 2 hours each day, and to speaking listening lessons, 2 hours each afternoon. Okay, so maybe these aspects, these skills are considered as equally important. What else can I notice? I can notice that more or less equal time is dedicated to the synchronous sessions, in red here, the live BBB sessions, and the asynchronous learning tasks that students will do independently. Okay, it's recommended that students spend 2 hours per day on those flipped learning asynchronous tasks, and I would recommend to a student that they spend about another 2 hours on self-study, subject-specific self-study tasks. Okay, so what else can we learn? We can learn something about the integration of lessons here. So in the asynchronous learning tasks, we will see underlined in green here that there are several reading writing tasks. So longer reading tasks, for example, reading core sources related to their essay, will be done outside of the classroom. And writing tasks, for example, writing their annotated bibliographies, will be done outside of the classroom. But also we'll notice that there are deadlines for these that refer to particular sessions, synchronous learning sessions. So it looks like the work that they do outside of the class will feed into these sessions. For example, writing annotated bibliography entries and reading their source texts will feed into a seminar lesson at the end of the week. So I can also notice there that there is integration between the reading writing aspects of the course, writing an annotated bibliography based on reading of core source texts, and sharing information, speaking in seminars. Okay, so we can't really separate reading, writing, speaking, listening, even though the syllabus does look like that on the surface. These aspects are all integrated. Again, we can see from the asynchronous listening tasks underlined in blue here, a lot of these refer to topics that relate to reading and writing. For example, the first one is a video guide for developing reading strategies. And that must be completed before 2.5, when students will have a synchronous session about critical reading strategies and learn how to write their annotated bibliographies. So they will use their listening skills in order to listen to watch a video related to key reading skills. So hopefully we can see the integration here. Integration perhaps in topics as well. The main lecture this week is on media sensationalism and bias. Media sensationalism? What has this got to do with anything? But maybe we connect. There is bias in the media, but perhaps when we evaluate sources, we 2.7, we can connect some of the ideas from the lecture on bias to finding bias in academic sources. So hopefully there are links everywhere that the students will make and will be guided to make. Okay, let's zoom in even further then on a particular lesson. What is this critical reading and annotated bibliographies they've got to do in 2.5? And why do they have to watch a video guide before? Okay, I guess a good place to start is actually the materials, synchronous learning materials workbook. Hopefully, at the start of each lesson, this will tell us what the session aims are. Okay, so in this session, students are going to understand and consider the purpose of writing an annotated bibliography, consider the importance of critical reading of sources, and explore, hopefully evaluate some different strategies to critically read their core source texts. Okay, they're not going to learn or be introduced to these strategies necessarily because they've been introduced to them in the video, but they can discuss, they can evaluate the use of these different sources. Okay, so then maybe we want to zoom out again with our telescope because we want to think about how does this relate to what students have to do in their assessment. Always a good question. So then we could zoom out and look at the course handbook. We could say, how does this evaluation of sources relate to students' assessments? Well, the summative writing coursework will be an 1100 to 1300 academic essay. It will relate to the student's field. Students will need to express and support a stance. And what other messages can we see? We can see that this is written over a period of time until week 8. So there's clearly a focus on process writing here. And as an important part of process writing, of course, is feedback that the students receive. And we can see that the feedback is a combination of written feedback and oral feedback, a combination of teacher feedback and peer feedback, and more of an emphasis on formative feedback than there is on summative feedback. Okay, so we can look over these course documents and they can communicate some messages. But these are some of the messages that we've noticed and that have been communicated to us. But as Steve says, then we need to take a step back, and these course messages can be conceptualized in how they work together to construct value systems or constellations, to use the metaphor. So we've perhaps got our communicated messages, but what are the value systems or the constellations, the patterns that these messages communicate? Okay, we can have a look at these messages. Maybe we see different patterns. Hopefully we see different patterns from different contexts. Maybe this is a constellation. Maybe I'd see a pattern here. What would that constellation communicate? Well, it might communicate the idea that writing and speaking are equally prioritized because of the time that is spent on these skills in the syllabus. It might communicate that all skills are fully integrated. As I mentioned, the lecture topic feeds into seminars and writing. Seminar speaking is often based on the content of lectures and reading and directed towards writing. So that might also communicate the message that reading writing teachers and speaking listening teachers will need to collaborate closely in order to get the most out of course delivery. And maybe it communicates the message that asynchronous listening and reading tasks, so most long reading and writing tasks are asynchronous. Most listening content, for example, lectures, is asynchronous. So maybe that communicates the message that the time in our synchronous sessions should be spent on more, what we might call higher order tasks. I use the example of critical reading strategies and perhaps the introduction of different critical reading strategies will come in the listening content. The lecture about this will be even applied in students' reading tasks, and then synchronous sessions can relate more to discussions around the evaluation of different critical reading strategies. Okay? So that's one constellation or one pattern that we might get from looking at the connections between messages within the cosmos of the PSE. Okay. And let's see, how much time do we have? Should we look at some together? Okay, I can't find any options for breakout rooms as such, and it's already 11:40, so I'll just go through a bit more quickly. Maybe you can see your own patterns. For example, I might notice there is a constellation here. And I might think this constellation tells us that students need to be very self-organized, independent learners, certainly if they're going to get anything out of the subject-specific content, and if they are going to get the most out of the asynchronous content, because equal time, I think, should be spent outside of the classroom as inside the classroom. Maybe it tells us, maybe it warns us that successful delivery of the synchronous sessions will, to a large extent, be dependent on the students' engagement with the asynchronous sessions. Each asynchronous task must be completed before a particular lesson. How can we ensure that? How can we ensure that our synchronous sessions, our lessons, can still be successful even if students haven't completed these asynchronous tasks? What will happen in that case? That's a message. Maybe this constellation tells us that students' exposure to the ideas and the language from academic disciplines, something that is so often mentioned to us by the academic subject lecturers after students get on their courses, comes from the academic writing process in terms of students developing their own questions, working with their own sources, and the self-study materials. So we're thinking, how can we ensure this, especially not as experts ourselves within these academic subjects? So that could be another constellation. Maybe this is a constellation that tells us that gradually developing one assessed subject-specific essay is a thread that runs through the entire course. A discursive essay will be written as an 8-week process with formative and summative feedback, mostly formative feedback, of course, throughout this process. It tells us that reading, writing sessions and listening, speaking sessions are both used to learn the skills and to share the ideas that are useful for students' essays. That's okay, so it's not just the reading, writing sessions, but also the speaking, listening. And maybe it communicates an idea that what is learned through this process is much more important than the actual end product that the students produce. Maybe that's why there is much more emphasis on different forms of formative feedback than there is on summative feedback. Okay, so all this zooming in and zooming out for Steve Kirk is what he sees as framing the course provision. Noticing these constellations frames the course provision in all its forms: curriculum content and progression, expected teacher practice, and aspirations of students. But, as Steve points out, these constellations evolve locally. They may well differ considerably from context to context and serve as an important basis for what is seen as legitimate practice within a given context. So just like those ancient astronomers were gazing up at the stars in China, in ancient Greece, in the Middle East, creating entirely different star maps, looking at the same stars from different patterns that they had noticed in the cosmos. And so too, teachers and students operating within different contexts and with experience of operating in different contexts are also going to construct different meanings, are going to notice different constellations. And I think that will be a very interesting thing. But who is doing this stargazing? Who is the astronomer? Is this the curriculum designer? Is this the teachers? Is it the students? Has the curriculum designer rendered such a perfect pattern of constellations within the PSE cosmos that teachers just need to pick this up and can go into the classroom and deliver this seamlessly? Can students just turn up, sit down and learn what is taught to them? So now I'm going to go back to completely mixing my metaphors. I think this is similar to the question of who is riding this horse, who is driving the course delivery. It might seem at the moment that the curriculum designer is driving the course delivery. I have shown you parts of a curriculum and parts of a syllabus that I have constructed based on a very specific context of my experience in Durham University, Newcastle University, and Cardiff. But what does that say about the idea of recontextualization? I have not taught in China for very long. This is my first time teaching in China. I have never been a student in China. I can't speak Chinese. I've never taught in any other Chinese institution apart from this one. I've never taught in any other transnational institution. Am I the best recontextualizer of course delivery? So in this context, if the curriculum designer is driving the course delivery, if the curriculum designer is noticing the constellations in the cosmos, then we zoom in, we zoom right in one classroom on one planet. I think it would look rather like this. Is this active engagement with the messages in the PSE cosmos? I think not. Not for this teacher, not for these students. It seems to be a mismatch between what is in the constellations, or even a mismatch between trying to notice what messages are communicated in these constellations and the course delivery. So why is that? What can we do about it? Well, I think we've looked at several ways to promote more active engagement on PSE. Firstly, as Mayton said before, a collaboration in structuring of knowledge practices and making meaning from these knowledge practices. How do we do that? Well, I think Kirk's permeable flows of knowledge across different fields of practice needs to be embedded in the working culture of the course. And I think what we are doing now, having a PSE themed strand in a staff symposium with so many prospective PSE teachers, is a great way to achieve that. We are already doing that. What about recontextualization? As I just hinted at, I don't think I am the best recontextualizer here of this EAP research and curriculum. As Steve mentioned, these constellations should and do evolve locally. I think, for example, having a CEPA Bali conference on the theme of globalization, which so many of us attended, was a great way to start recontextualizing from global perspectives. And talks such as Steve's, which he recontextualized for the context of the conference in which he was presenting, is a very good example. So, how can we share knowledge and recontextualize? We have 2 days for an induction program, not a lot of time, but I want to get as many voices as possible from different contexts and different perspectives within our induction program. So too the weekly COP sessions and teacher meetings that focus on course delivery, but hearing different voices about how this course delivery can flow within specific context. We find ourselves here in XJTLU. And involving students within this process. Okay, so what do I mean by this? How can we involve students in the process? So I used the example earlier. Why should we involve students in the process? Yeah, we can't just take it as a given that everyone would agree with this. I agree here with Brown's work on negotiated syllabus, negotiated curriculum, including learners' voices. I think promotes greater freedom, control, ownership over their learning process. I touched on earlier about the importance of constructive alignment. And I said that the greatest factor in this is having transparency. So we looked, for example, at week 2, which focuses very much on source use. So I think this should involve an open dialogue with students. Students might say, okay, I don't know, I'm finding difficulty to find and evaluate appropriate sources. I know that this is something I need to demonstrate in the marking descriptors. I don't know, maybe the student is having difficulty using Google Scholar. Okay, maybe we need to suggest some alternatives to using this. In terms of demonstrating source use, the student knows that they need to summarize, they need to synthesize, they need to use reporting structures. This is in the use of sources. Maybe the student comes to you and they say, look, I've read several source texts within my field, within my specialized interest, and actually there doesn't seem to be a varied range of different reporting structures, different reporting verbs. There seems to be a real predominance of end-cited references as opposed to author prominence. Okay, maybe that's something we need to consider within our cluster then, and maybe we need to adjust the way we teach these students according to their input, so it is more authentic, the discourse within their discipline. Okay, so I think these types of conversations are what force both the students and the teachers to notice these links, to notice these constellations and value systems within the cosmos of PSE and within the specific context in which we are working. Okay, so perhaps that forces us to challenge some of the patterns that are there in the cosmos. We don't necessarily need to notice them and accept them. We can challenge them, we can change them. But at least the teachers and students are not simply gazing out to understand the patterns in the curriculum in a passive way, but the teachers and students are actually becoming active participants in negotiating and recontextualizing the course delivery together, which I think demonstrates a much higher level of engagement and ownership of what's being taught. Okay. So then hopefully we're not only putting the horse before the cart, we are putting the students in the driving seat. No, horses don't have driving seats. In the saddle of the horse, and we are all zooming in and out. We are all making meaning and noticing constellations together. And if we zoom in on another planet in which this is happening, perhaps it is a far more productive PSE classroom. Okay, so thank you, everybody. I'll leave it there. Thank you for listening. Here are some of the references that I've referred to. And we've just got, I think, a little bit of time for some questions. Which all come from Patrick. Patrick.
No, they're not questions, Sam. They were just observations as you were saying things. So
okay,
there's no need to worry about
them. Are any of them worth quickly summarizing rather than reading through them?
The only one that isn't me being just sort of entertaining or something is the issue about what to do regarding the possibility of students not actually doing the asynchronous tasks and the challenge that raises for the tutor. Because ideally, your BBB sessions would still function pretty well, whether the students had done the tasks or not. But you'd hope that also there would be an intrinsic reward for the students in having done them, in that the sessions would be more meaningful. So that's a sort of little juggling that goes on when you're a tutor, trying to figure out how you can deliver something based on the assumption that they should have done it, but they might not have done. That's what I was thinking about there.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I realized, well, deliberately, I didn't offer an answer to that question during the talk. It was an open question.
I think each tutor
this is a danger of
have to
flipped
find
learning. It's less of a danger in courses where you see the students every day and can give them constant reminders, and the course builds up a kind of momentum as it goes along. And also, you mentioned before about smaller class sizes.
And motivational levels on presessional are usually pretty good as well.
And motivational levels, yeah. Linking this again to other sessions, again, this is examples of these flows of knowledge and how they go around and permeate boundaries. There was a wonderful talk at the CEPA Ballot conference from some of our colleagues about research that had been done into goal setting. Now, this was goal setting with year one students, but I think a lot of the discoveries from that research and a lot of the recommendations could be linked to the importance of goal setting and reflection on students keeping up with, engaging with, making the most of asynchronous materials. And I think some of our colleagues who were involved in that research in year one and that presented that so interestingly at the conference are going to be interested in continuing that research, or taking that research forward and thinking about different methods of goal setting with some of our PSE students, and specifically investigating how that can relate to their engagement with the self-study materials. So I don't know if there's anyone that wants to say any more about that, but I think that's a really interesting, relevant project.
Sam, I think Nigel has a question in the chat box.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. So I don't know if anyone I can see this. Will you offer students support in analysing sources as examples of writing style in their majors? Okay, so the answer is to an extent. There are, I think we said 39 different majors, 39 different masters that we will be catering for potentially. So we will try to notice the major patterns in terms of different types of, for example, analysing sources. Okay, writing style. So we're talking generally about writing style. Yeah, I think, so yeah, a few things. So students will be exposed to different writing styles in the different core source texts. So the core source texts that are, I don't want to say recommended, provided to students will be specific to their cluster. So different core source texts will be provided, which are broad discipline specific within each student's cluster. And these will be exploited during lessons. So different clusters will be exploiting different core source texts and will be guided to exploit these. So I think it's an aspect of discourse analysis and genre analysis. And I think generally students being given the skills to analyze discourse and to analyze the genres is more useful than you know, us trying to analyze all of the different genres ourselves and then picking that apart and teaching that specifically to the students. But yeah, hopefully the students will be at least exposed to them and have the skills to be able to deconstruct them themselves.
Yes, Sal, I'll just come in here. Can you hear me? Or not?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. I think we were talking about opening up another cluster as well. That might address that question a little bit as well.
That's a good point. Yeah, 5 clusters. Last year 4 clusters. This year 5 clusters. So a bit more specific there.
that
Thanks.
could make it more specific, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, David. That's a good point. Yeah, so we are getting a bit more specific.
Yeah. Yeah, I just did a session on presenting our community of practice, divisional community of practice earlier, and you just mentioned about our community of practice there, Sam, on a presessional. It worked quite well last year, where we got some teachers together and looked at the materials that we had developed, and then feed forward to the following week. I think this is a very useful thing for teachers to engage in the syllabus. It's a place, it's a time when everybody can talk about how it's working. Yeah.
Yeah, completely agree. I think engagement with the syllabus is so important, and we can do that individually. As I said, we all have our particular accumulated knowledge from the different contexts in which we've taught, but in order to recontextualize that knowledge, we should collaborate, right? We should share this with all of our colleagues with experience in different contexts. And I think the examples kind of show that. I think I'm an example of that from the different places that I've worked and the people I've collaborated with. And that was certainly a feature. I used the example of Durham University and that kind of analysis of the syllabus and relating that to the following week's course delivery.
Yeah, so in Durham, for example, you know, in these places, what we did was we met up sort of on a Thursday or a Friday, and then we discussed the previous week's syllabus and then feed forward to the following week in what is working. I think that's really important part of a course, you know, that we have a teacher meeting about the, you know, what has gone on before and what's going to go on the subsequent week. That's where you can really see how the materials are working.
You also get really helpful tips and tricks from fellow tutors in how to approach stuff. And very often, 2 points, it acts as a kind of handy proofreading service because you tend to get tutors picking out errors that have persisted into the PowerPoints, which benefits everybody. And you also get individual tutors have nice little innovative ways of delivering a particular thing, and everybody looks at it and thinks, wow, I wish I'd thought of that, and then everybody does it, and that works nicely as well.
Yeah, Pat. Maybe particularly with the example of within the context of online learning, we all have really, really different varied experiences of online learning. And we found last summer some little tips can make such a big difference, something that maybe just some feature of BBB that we didn't know about, and someone points it out, makes a little screen capture video of how to use it. And then we all say, yeah, we can do that in our classes. It makes such a big difference to the course delivery.
And this can be sort of annotated on the curriculum each week, so it doesn't call for a big reflection at the end of the course. We're reflecting during the week in annotating the curriculum to make adjustments during the week, rather than waiting to the end of the course.
Yeah, sure. I mean, reflection is an ongoing process, absolutely.
Thanks, Sam. Excellent. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for your contributions, David.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Pat. Any other questions? Any final questions or thoughts? Yeah. Okay. One final question from Nigel, and it's a really good one. So if I could just relate to it, how did you select your sources? So I see that Nigel here, I think is referring to the core source texts that are provided for the particular discipline-specific clusters. Steve mentioned, he did, I remember this, Steve mentioned that departments have a role in recommending source texts. Yes, this is something else that I want to take from Steve, something else that I want to implement here. I'm talking to different departmental heads at the moment about recommending core source texts. So I want them to be representative of the style in the field. We can't guarantee that every master's program even enough master's programs from each cluster, we'll recommend representative sources or any sources. But the response so far has been good, actually. I've had some good meetings with program directors, and we've had some good responses in terms of providing materials. So yes, Nigel, yeah, hopefully they will be representative.
That's a funny laugh.
What an evil laugh.
It was an evil laugh, yeah. Whose laugh was it?
That was me. I didn't realise I was unmuted.
What were you laughing about?
So then I muted myself and started apologising, but of course then I was muted. Meanwhile, Nigel's just told me, Pat, stop sending me private messages that are supposed to go to everyone. So I'm going to retire now and
Yeah.
thank you for a great presentation and mull it all over.
Yeah, yeah. I think hopefully it's a presentation to mull.
Okay. We're going to have lunch here.
Okay, I'm going to walk the dogs.
Oh, you're at home.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
Thanks,
right.
Sam. See ya.
Thank you, everybody. Everybody, feel free to email me if you think of any questions. I didn't say that, but feel free to get in touch with me individually or send me an email if anyone has any questions at all or any thoughts at all. I'd be happy to hear them.
Yeah, and just to let you know, I'm on at 2 o'clock in the afternoon talking about research. So Sam mentioned 3 parts there. He mentioned research, curriculum, and pedagogy. So we're talking about peer review research in the PSE at 2 o'clock if you want to attend that one.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Thank you.
I definitely recommend that. Shameless plug. See you at 2.
Bye.
All right.